Well, let's talk about the legal nuts and bolts of this case and how something like this could have happened. We're going to do that with Meghann Cuniff, legal affairs journalist, our friend there in Los Angeles, and AP Courts reporter in New York City, Michael Sisak, and they join me. Michael, Meghann, thanks for being with us here. You were listening to Arthur Aidala there kind of recount Harvey Weinstein's reaction to all of this. Michael, I'm going to start with you. Where did the prosecution go wrong here? What were the errors to make it get overturned?
It wasn't so much the prosecution per se, although they pushed for as much evidence that they could bring into the case, other women beyond the women whose allegations they were charging. They had 3 other women testify about allegations that were not charged in the New York indictment. And then they also sought to bring in evidence of other alleged bad behavior by Harvey Weinstein, a fight that he got into with his brother, being mean to people at restaurants, things that were not necessarily to the level of the allegations in the case, but that if he were to testify in his own defense, could have been used against him to undermine his credibility and show propensity for bad behavior across the board. Prosecutors asked for all of that, and they got all of that. And the appeals court today really found fault with the judge who presided over the case, James Burke, because he allowed all of this material in, and the Court of Appeals found that really prejudiced the case toward prosecutors and against Harvey Weinstein, because he could not defend himself against not only the allegations at hand, but all these other allegations that did come in or would have come in had he testified.
You know, Meghann, to that point, I mean, I know hindsight is 20/20, but, you know, was this a red herring back then? Could you kind of trace from then till now that this was going to be a possible outcome here? I mean, what are people in your circles saying today about either the strength or perceived flimsiness of the initial case to how we got here today?
I hadn't heard so much about the flimsiness of the case against Weinstein, but I had heard a lot about the concerns and the hope that his defense had about these prior bad acts and there just being too many of them to be legally justifiable. So, I mean, I had heard this when I was covering the LA trial, because while there were prior bad acts introduced there weren't as many as the New York case. And I think his appeal in LA is going to be focused on different issues than that. I had heard that his appellate team in New York was confident about this, or maybe not confident, but hopeful about this, and felt like they really had some legal issues. And I think that's really reflected in the opinion, just kind of what an unprecedented issue this is, dealing with sexual assault allegations like this and prosecuting them.
Yeah, I want to read from, Michael, your report. You were quoting there the State Court of Appeals in the decision, finding that, quote, the trial court erroneously admitted testimony of uncharged, alleged prior sex acts. You say the court's majority called this, quote, an abuse of judicial discretion, kind of going into the judge's decision there at the time to allow for this at the very initial outset of the trial here. You know, I want to ask, too, because Harvey Weinstein is the poster child for the Me Too movement. He was the most highly public profile figure to have a conviction secured against alleged acts during the Me Too era and movement here. Does it undermine, does it diminish the work, the progress of the Me Too era? What did the victims say about that today, Michael?
It's certainly a setback. It's certainly a gut check, gut punch for people who had to pour their heart and soul out on the witness stand to talk to investigators, and may possibly have to relive those stories again. What they say were real traumas that they experienced at the hands of Harvey Weinstein. You know, his prosecution and his conviction were landmarks. The Me Too movement started in a sense, it erupted because of Harvey Weinstein, because of allegations that came out against him. And then this is a landmark day as well, where you see this case, these convictions overturned and a new trial ordered. It is certainly the most seismic disruption to the Me Too movement that we have seen, just like the conviction was sort of the most seismic result of all of those people coming forward. Wow. The only other case really of any note that has been overturned was Bill Cosby's conviction. Right. And those allegations really kind of preceded what we know as the Me Too movement, where he was a famous guy in the 80s and the 90s and was ultimately convicted as Me Too was kind of taking off. But similar issues there, where the balancing act of how many other acts, how many other allegations do you introduce? And ultimately his conviction was overturned, and he is now a free man, as unlike Harvey Weinstein, who had that other conviction and is still in prison.
Yeah, of course, and that was in Pennsylvania. So, Meghann, you tweeted out the statement there from Doug Wigder. He represents so many of these victims. You say, in quoting him, today's decision, he says, is a major step back in holding those accountable for acts of sexual violence. I want to ask you, Meghann, what's the likelihood that prosecutors will retry this in New York? I mean, Weinstein's in his 70s. He's medically infirmed. He's quite unstable. He's had a lot of health issues. Is it worth retrying him? Are they going to pursue that?
I mean, I would have to think that they would be very likely to pursue it because, I mean, the reasons that we just stated don't seem like the kind of reasons that prosecutors would consider legitimate reasons on whether to hold someone accountable or not for a crime. And they might point to the fact that what we saw in LA, a lot of people in Los Angeles questioned whether it was worth bringing this case against him when he was already convicted in New York. And look what just happened. His New York convictions are overturned and he's in custody on the LA convictions. So I think there's just some kind of question here over what's going to happen.
We're just seeing some file footage of it right now. I mean, Michael, he's not leaving prison anytime soon. I think that's pretty clear, right? I mean, we should maybe reiterate that point. What's the news on that front? I mean, just because your conviction is overturned doesn't mean your sentence is commuted?
Well, he doesn't. So for purposes of the New York case, he does not have a sentence anymore. That case is in effect reverted back to right after he was indicted. Okay. So what happens as far as the New York case goes is it is like the convictions never happened, the sentence never happened, the acquittals do happen. So he cannot be retried, of course, double jeopardy applies. He cannot be retried on the counts he was acquitted on, which he was in New York. However, unlike a lot of people who find themselves in this situation, he has that other conviction in California where he has a 16-year sentence. And so therefore, even if he were to return to court on the New York, and he will return to court on the New York case, he's not walking out of prison or of jail because he has that other conviction.
Yeah. Meghann, lastly, too, here, you mentioned that there was some, cautious optimism on the part of his L.A. legal team there to maybe mimic what had happened today in New York. I mean, what's the status on the appellate process there in L.A.?
They have gotten a couple delays now for their opening brief, which is common in the appellate process, and I think also just reflects the stakes of what they're dealing with and the legal issues that they're grappling with and trying to get into the brief. But I think it has a due date of May by now, and they've got some serious issues that they're looking at regarding the one victim that he was convicted of in Los Angeles, regarding some various issues with statements she made that were and were not admitted. So it's a little bit different than the prior bad acts issues that overturned the New York convictions, although we did hear from some prior bad acts witnesses in LA that I imagine will be mentioned in the opening brief. So we're still a long ways from any kind of decision on that. Okay. But if we ever get to a place where his New York case is still pending retrial, and for some reason, we don't want to make a prediction, but his LA convictions do get overturned, it could be pretty interesting to see what his lawyers do to try to get him out of custody pending any retrials.
Wow. All right, Michael, Meghann, thanks so much for your time, for your reporting. We'll talk soon.
Thank you
so much.